today. The phone screener is back from killing hogs. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. It should alarm everyone who calls into this program that my call screener, as a matter of catharsis, must sometimes abandon us all for several days of solitude in the woods killing animals. They say that 1 out of every 2 people has the potential to be a serial killer. I heard this the other day, and they interviewed a guy who had shoved his friend off a cliff. Having heard that news, he was afraid that his friend could have been the serial killer. Now, the phone number again, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let us begin with this article that has many people abuzz, and I'm glad I waited a few days for people to actually digest the story instead of being whipped into a frenzy. Molly Ball in Time magazine at the end of last week put out a story, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. And a lot of people seized upon the story to continue to perpetuate outrage over a stolen election and said, aha, proof, the election was stolen. See these left-wing groups, see what they did. Molly Ball has documented it and they're bragging about it. Except if you read the story, they didn't really steal the election. They actually strategized and they outmaneuvered Republicans. That's not a theft. That's incompetence on the Republican side. There's no theft here. There's no fraud. There's no nothing. There's no hacking voter machines, nothing. And of course, you'll have some conspiracists say, well, if they're willing to admit all of this, what weren't they willing to admit? And that's the thing, though. They were willing to admit everything they did. Listen, there are a lot of people who want to peddle the myth of the stolen election because it makes them feel better. It also makes them, I'm learning, feel unburdened. They no longer have to participate in a process that they don't particularly like anymore. It's icky, and they can just wash their hands of it and say, well, it's stolen. Time to withdraw from the scene and do nothing. It provides them their excuse to extricate them from a messy political process where deep down they really don't believe it was messy, but they have to hide behind that excuse for why they've given up on culture, why they've given up on politics, why they've given up on all of it. They just don't like the dirtiness of it. So they see this article and it provides them further proof. But what it actually does is it shows just how inept the Republicans were in 2020 across the board. And privately, when you talk to members of President Trump's on campaign team, including those who participated in their post-mortem of their election, there was frankly a lot of ineptitude on the Republican side, and their screaming about a stolen election has provided them a smokescreen to avoid being held accountable for their incompetence. This has nothing to do with the president, but the people who surrounded the president and made a lot of money, essentially grifting off President Trump's campaign and the president, running it into the ground and spending money on nonsensical things. So what Molly Ball does is she provides a portrait of a group that begins as a progressive activist coalition of unions and corporate titans and evolves into a bipartisan group towards the end as the fallout from the election is exacerbated post-election. Now, you have to remember, setting the scene here, a bunch of progressives were threatening to burn down America if they didn't get their way. And there are progressives who are alarmed that their own side would potentially want to burn down America if they lose. And there are equally progressives who are alarmed by President Trump telling everyone if he didn't win, it was going to be stolen. It was proof of a stolen election, and realizing they got to do something to ensure the integrity of the election. They also, the progressives, wanted to win. What they did was they did what a lot of Republicans used to do. Let's take Georgia just as a microcosm here in Georgia, where I am. Let me explain to you, in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I was highly active within the Republican Party as a lawyer, as a chairman of the College Republicans, as a campaign manager and campaign consultant, one of the things Republicans did very well is organize the state, and not just organize the state, but organize coalitions. I worked for a time for Saxby Chambliss, who, when he was running for Congress, was his coalition's director, volunteer capacity. Essentially, they just gave me a title, and I wrote letters on his behalf to different coalitions and talked to people so that he didn't have to talk to the pro-life groups and the gun groups and things like that. But they all coordinated. They all got on the same page. They were all heading towards a common purpose. And they also networked with corporations and people big CEOs, made sure they were involved. And then you organize down to the precinct level. Every county is divided into precincts. Actually, every county is divided into areas, and every area divided into precincts. So I'm just speaking for me here in Bibb County where I live in the Howard precincts. There are a number of Howard precincts. They cover North Macon. In South Macon, you have the Rutland area, and those Rutland areas are divided into precincts. You've got the Hazard area. It's divided into precincts. You've got East Macon is divided into multiple precincts. And downtown Macon is divided into multiple precincts. Every precinct has roughly the same number of people in it. They shift those precincts around. There are about 50 in the county. And there was a time when the Republican Party in Georgia had all of those precincts mapped out, and they knew who every single Republican was in those precincts, and they were in regular communication with those people to make sure they had their grassroots network together. Now, in some places, in some cases in Georgia, that still happens. But it has atrophied within the Republican Party at the time that the Democratic Party has gone overboard with what the Republicans used to do. The Republicans in Georgia used to have a network of people where if someone new was moving into the neighborhood, the party probably knew about it before that person even knew where to go to fill out their voter registration form. And helpfully, a Republican would show up and get that person, make sure that person was registered to vote. They did. I used to do this when I was in college. It was one of the things the college Republicans helped do in Georgia. Your local Republican captain got word that someone had moved into the neighborhood down the street, and helpfully a local Republican would go by, knock on the door, and make sure they were registered to vote, answer any questions, make them feel at home, bring them a casserole. Local churches used to do that too, and oftentimes that doesn't happen at all anymore. People are less neighborly than they were. Well, the Democrats this year decided they needed to do something similar, but they also needed to, with Donald Trump having convinced the American media that he was a liar and lied about everything, that they would have to battle disinformation. And they were able to build peer pressure upon social media companies to tamp down misinformation and disinformation. There's no proof that they got massive amounts of stuff silenced. They got some stuff silenced and taken down. They got other stuff slowed down. They worked with media companies to make sure everyone understood that there were certain narratives that needed to be advanced. This is all standard politics. And they worked with corporations to make sure that corporations, if Joe Biden won, corporations would immediately, through various trade groups, declare him the winner. And ultimately, they got Republicans involved as well. Republicans concerned about the destabilization of the election, some of them very much pro-Trump, some of them very anti-Trump, but all of them wanting to make sure that there was not chaos in the election with the world watching. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, well, this was stolen. This is proof of that it was stolen. One of the things these groups did is they amassed lots of outside money to go educate voters on how to vote absentee. Part of this was a strategic problem with the Republican campaign. You had Donald Trump telling everyone that the Democrats were going to steal it through absentee balloting. Do not go vote by absentee ballot. And what you saw in states like Georgia, where typically Republicans have an absentee voting advantage, is the Democrats crushed it 4-1. The Democrats overwhelmed the Republican with absentee balloting, and Republicans needed to be at parity or better in the early vote, and they barely were there in the early vote. It's amazing how the Republicans dropped the ball this year, and privately they will concede that given the president's distrust of absentee balloting and the mixed messages on voter integrity, a lot of Republican groups either didn't participate, didn't know how to participate, or they didn't want to perceive as being a bad guy and contradicting the president, so they let sleeping dogs lie. One of the very few places where this didn't happen was in Florida. And what happened? The president won Florida. The president blessed the Florida early voting and absentee voting strategy, and Republicans crushed it. Here in Georgia, Republicans flubbed it. They didn't even try for an absentee voter strategy. These outside groups looked at the pandemic and never let a crisis go to waste. They had an opportunity to encourage black voters for the first time to vote in overwhelming numbers by absentee ballots. Now, this is very important. You need to understand this historically. black voters vote on election day. They vote on election day because it took them a very long time to secure their right to vote. And as a matter of historic pride, black communities tend to turn out on election day to vote. They don't want to vote absentee. They want to stand in line and vote. It is their right. They fought for it in the civil rights era. They want it. This time, the NAACP and a number of left-wing groups got together and collaborated on messaging that we've got a global pandemic. Your life is in danger if you go stand in line because you get this virus. So vote by absentee. And they send absentee election volunteers out into communities. They sent forms, and on it went. They outworked, they out-hustled, they outmaneuvered the Republicans. They lined up corporations in America to give money to help with absentee balloting, all of it framed nonpartisan. They worked with nonpartisan groups, but clearly the progressives had in mind getting Democrats to go vote, and it worked. The Republicans could have done every single thing done in this. They could have done every single thing that was done by these groups, and they chose not to. They chose to distrust the process. They chose to see doubt in the process, and they chose to try to rally everyone to vote on election day, and it didn't work. Part of this was the president had burned so many bridges, and his campaign had burned so many bridges. There were a lot of people who didn't want to give him the time of day. If you're a Republican, you have to acknowledge that some within the party did a very good job of making a lot of people mad, and I'm not talking about the president and his antics. I'm talking about the party as a whole, burned bridges with a lot of outside groups who probably would have been willing to help them. The Chamber of Commerce itself, for the first time this year, was decided to back a couple of Democrats. And you got to be mindful of this landscape. And part of this, I do think you have to ask yourself as a Republican, why were all of these people willing to get together and vote for the other side? What about us led them to do that? Not all of them were progressive groups. A lot of them were, and they'll never be with you, but some of them weren't. Why did those groups go the other way? Why did our side not engage in an absentee balloting strategy? Why did our side not engage in a litigation strategy? Republicans have very good election lawyers, and pretty much all of the major election lawyers on the GOP sat on the sidelines this year. What led them to sit on the sidelines? And some of them, frankly, were not asked. Some of them that I've talked to didn't want to be a part of what they perceived as a clown show of incompetent people that they saw play out after the election with Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani. But then there's one last thing you need to understand. I've read many a story like this over the year, and there's something else you have to understand about it. Most of the power players who work behind the scenes want to stay behind the scenes. What this is credit grabbing as well. They're not bragging about stealing an election. There's no proof they stole the election. They're not bragging about committing vote fraud. That would be a felony, and there's no proof that they committed vote fraud. What they're doing is they're bragging about being the ones, labor unions and progressive groups, who put together a coalition that they want you to believe saved democracy and the electoral process in America. Had they not gotten together and done what they did, the process probably would have worked out exactly the same way. Had they not gotten together and done what they did, the outcome could have been the same way. But they want credit for it. And that ultimately is what this story is all about. A group of progressives are concerned that Joe Biden likes Mitch McConnell and has a good bipartisan working relationship behind the scenes in Congress. And they have a progressive grab bag that they want from Congress and from the Biden administration. And they need Joe Biden and the people in Washington to understand this was started as a progressive cause. This was started as a way to save democracy, and therefore they are owed. In my experience, dealing with these stories on both the right and the left, what you have is a group of people who are bragging, who are overplaying their hand, who are amplifying their involvement, all because they want something out of Washington. Molly Ball is a great writer. She actually wrote a profile of me a number of years ago. Molly Ball's a great writer. She's giving these people exactly what they want. enough rope to hang themselves, frankly. They want to be known as the people who saved America. They want to be known as the people who saved democracy. Well, she's willing to let them be defined by that and let the chips fall where it may. And some of these people will wind up not getting what they want, in large part because they're bragging too much. And oftentimes, when you brag as much as these people are bragging, you wind up getting the short end of the stick, because the people who worked behind the scenes in private to actually ensure the integrity of the election become livid that you're trying to claim credit, oftentimes for things you don't deserve. These types of stories tend to not go well for the people who rush to the media to brag about what they did. There's no proof of a stolen election. There's no proof of fraud. What there's proof of is that Democrats outmaneuvered Republicans, were able to get corporations to side with them, were able to even get some Republican groups to side with them, were able to use the president's campaign's efforts to undermine absentee balloting against them, and ultimately want to brag to get something out of the Biden administration. This probably won't wind up for them the way they think it will. These types of stories come out every 4 years. And again, the people who rush out and try to brag and make these salacious claims are typically the ones who wind up getting exactly the opposite of what they want.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Okay, I gotta kind of chuckle just a little bit. So I guess last Tuesday, Charlie mentioned, maybe it was Monday or Tuesday. Yeah, it had to be Tuesday. Mentioned, he's like, man, the phones are so slow this week, and then he was gone Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I didn't realize that he was. And he probably told me, and I forgot. And then on Thursday, for some reason, the phone lines were open, and I mentioned it, and I mean, just whoosh. We got multiple lines, and they were all full. And then I felt really bad when I realized he wasn't around. All these people were calling, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang. And I had to close the phone lines back. Well, now the phone lines actually are open today. If you feel the need to call, the phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I want to play an excerpt of a commercial you probably saw last night during the Super Bowl. Actually, looking at the clock and looking how long it is, I'm probably going to have to wait on this till we come back. Let me just say, the Super Bowl last night, I kind of was rooting for Kansas City, but you can't really root against Tom Brady. So I was very torn. I was interested in watching the game, but man, what a blowout, which I think most people expected. Tom Brady, definitely one of the greatest, if not the greatest athletes in modern American sports across types of sports, but definitely the greatest in football. Just amazing. I typically watch the Super Bowl for the commercials. And I'm noticing, somebody commented to me the other day, and I think this is true, that we don't have a lot of actual funny comedies anymore in the country. And commercials that are supposed to be humorous are less humorous than ever. And I think part of that is wokeness. The amount of preachy commercials during the Super Bowl last night was ridiculous. Everything started with Jill Biden out there with this.
Hi there, I'm Jill Biden here at the White House with our two dogs, Champ and Major. For a lot of us during this pandemic, our pets have been such a source of joy and comfort, and maybe a bark or two on a video conference. The unconditional love from a dog is one of the most beautiful things on earth, and we owe it to them to keep ourselves healthy. So please keep wearing your masks, even when you're out walking your dog.
I'll be damned if I'm going to wear a mask when I go walk my dog. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for phrasing it that way. I shouldn't have done that. I'm not wearing a mask. Maybe in New York City, in an urban area, they need to say that, but we don't all live in urban areas. I go walk in my neighborhood, which is a crowded planned development, and I'll occasionally see people, but oftentimes, particularly in the middle of the day, I don't. Or we've got sidewalks on both sides in the middle of the street. Why are people wearing a mask in middle Georgia walking their dog? No. I'm pro mask, and this is ridiculous. Hello, it is Erick Erickson here. I got to switch gears from what I want to talk. I'll get back to what I want to talk because I really do want to talk about the commercials in the Super Bowl, particularly the Bruce Springsteen commercial. There's a point to be made. I need an "I told you so" moment first. If you'll forgive me, please, for having an "I told you so" moment. There is an "I told you so" moment that we need to have here. Last week, we talked about the Apple car deal. It is very big news here in Georgia that Kia, they've got a plant here in Georgia that makes Kia in West Point, I believe it is, and that they were East Point or West Point, I can't remember, but they were going to manufacture Apple's autonomous electric car here in Georgia. From my vantage point, I've got multiple iMacs in my house. I've got my MacBook Pro here in front of me. I've got my Apple Watch on. I've got my iPad and my iPhone here. I'm in the Apple cult. I make no bones about it. I like Apple's products. I think they work better than most PC products. They're less prone to viruses. They're more stable. I'm looking forward to upgrading my laptop to one of the M1 laptops. I'm a big Apple fan, and I pay a lot of attention to the company. I'm a shareholder in the company. I read a lot about the company, and I have long found common ground with Rush Limbaugh on the Apple rumor sites and technology sites and what's coming from Apple. I read a lot about Apple. And I said last week, when Hyundai and Kia were talking about this deal with Apple, that would kill the deal. Anyone who knows anything about Apple knows that if any supplier or partner talks openly about a project they're doing with Apple, Apple kills the deal. Well, guess what? Here's a headline from Reuters. Hyundai, Kia say Apple car deal now off. See $8.5 billion wiped off market value. South Korea's Hyundai Motor Company said on Monday it is not now in talks with Apple Inc. on autonomous electric cars, just a month after it confirmed early-stage talks with the tech giant, sending the automaker's shares sliding. Wiping $3 billion off its market value, Hyundai stock slid 6.2%. Shares in its affiliate, Kia Corp., which had been tipped in local media reports as the likely operational partner for Apple, tumbled 15%, a $5.5 billion hit. The announcement brings the curtain down on weeks of internal divisions at Hyundai Motor Company Group, parent to both automakers, about the potential tie-up, with some executives raising concerns about becoming a contract manufacturer for the U.S. tech giant and a tie-up reminiscent of electronics firm Foxconn's role in making devices for Apple like the iPhone. We are receiving requests for cooperation in joint development of autonomous electric vehicles from various companies, but they are at early stage and nothing has been decided, the automaker said on Monday, in compliance with stock market rules requiring regular updates to investors regarding market rumors. We are not having talks with Apple on developing autonomous vehicles. Kia shares had jumped 61% since Hyundai initially confirmed a local media report early in January that Apple and Hyundai were in discussions to develop self-driving electric vehicles by 2027 and develop batteries at U.S. factories operated by Hyundai or Kia. I could have told you. Well, I did tell you this was going to happen. And again, anybody who knows anything about Apple knows that if a potential business partner leaks the conversations or the news, they're done. This has happened routinely over the years where Apple shuts down. I mean, sometimes they cut off their nose despite their face in deals, but they will stop it. Here's a key paragraph. Apple, Apple, known to keep product plans under tight wraps, has never acknowledged talks with the automaker about building vehicles and wasn't immediately available for comment outside business hours in the United States. Analysts said talks might have collapsed over leaks of the partnership plan to media or possible insistence by Apple that Hyundai's role in any tie-up would be that of an equipment manufacturer rather than a strategic partner. Look, when you are dealing with Apple, you are dealing with the most valuable company on planet Earth and one of the most successful companies on planet Earth. and they require of you silence and not taking credit. And Hyundai blew it. You know, it actually worked in AT&T's favor to let Apple take over. When they developed the iPhone, Verizon didn't want to be a silent partner. They wanted to collaborate. They wanted to have veto, and Apple said absolutely not. And then Randall Stevenson, the head of AT&T, gave them a chance, and people at AT&T were none too happy about it because Apple dictated all sorts of stuff, but the development was the iPhone, and they gave an exclusivity to AT&T for a number of years, and it helped AT&T's bottom line indisputably just by keeping their mouths shut and going along with it. And Apple forced them to innovate in ways and got ahead of the competition on a number of things. Hyundai could have had a good thing, but they couldn't keep their mouth shut. It was predictable. I said it was going to happen, and it did. Nah, I won't say. Never mind. I was thinking of something else to say, but I won't. Now I want to move back to what I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about the commercials. There were a bunch of people. Chris Hayes, the guy from MSNBC, noted on Twitter last night he had never seen a football game before last night, which is the least surprising news if you know the guy. And I have to say, I understand why the NFL market is drying up. I understand why people are starting to tune out. And sometimes you get captured by people. You know, one of the rules I think that is causing a lot of talk radio to have issues these days is being captured by your audience. Now, I don't mean this disrespectfully to anybody, but I think when you get captured by your audience, such that you and the audience must affirm each other in a way that gives you no ability to disagree, you run into problems. And I think the NFL has been captured not by its audience, but by activists. And the NFL has to be woke, and it's got to be preachy, and it's got to tell you about systemic racism, which is a mythology. It's got to go with woke talking points, and people are tuning it out. And the commercials last night during the Super Bowl, a lot of it showed that woke culture is not sustainable. There were not a lot of good commercials last night. They were preachy. They were in your face. Some of them wanted to say things they weren't actually brave enough to say. And it didn't work. It's why so many comedies flop these days too. When you're woke, you can't make jokes about anything because someone might be offended. And the worst thing you could do in woke culture is offend anyone. You may target the white Christian male to offend him because that's the only group you can offend, and may accidentally offend someone else and you get canceled accidentally. You've got an entire American media now, press, focused on who can we cancel next. The woke mobs run all over the place. And it is genuinely not sustainable. And it's not going to end well for anybody. And it's starting to hurt the bottom line of advertisers, I would suspect, with their lack of funny commercials. And then to have all of these advertisers, well, we're not going to advertise during the Super Bowl. We're going to spend the money on COVID relief. And then they all advertised. But there's one, of course, the one commercial everybody's talking about. Depending on your politics, you view the ad differently. It's this one.
There's a chapel in Kansas, standing on the exact center of the lower 48. It never closes. All are more than welcome to come meet here in the middle. It's no secret. The middle has been a hard place to get to lately, between red and blue, between servant and citizen, between our freedom and our fear. Now, fear has never been the best of who we are. And as for freedom, it's not the property of just the fortunate few. It belongs to us all. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, it's what connects us. And we need that connection. We need the middle.
I'll stop it there. We need the middle. A buddy online commented, is Bruce Springsteen doing a Christian nationalist moderate commercial? Moderate Christian nationalism commercial? It's kind of what he was doing. Another friend of mine commented, first of all, Bruce Springsteen is the wrong messenger here, being a ardent progressive Democrat who never supports the Republicans. Probably not a guy who says we need the middle when he even condemns the middle. I saw another friend of mine who just loved it. Of course, he's anti-Trump, thinks that Republicans have gone off the rails and need to be extinguished from American society at the ballot box, who loved the commercial. It was a preachy commercial from Jeep. I thought it was interesting. It was in a Christian chapel in the center of the United States and essentially affirms the moderating voice of Christianity, and it essentially is asking for, hey, Christians, we need you in the public square as a voice of reasonableness. We need the middle. I will tell you this. This goes back to Barney Frank, who the former congressman who one time said, be a liberal or a conservative, don't be a moderate, because then you stand for nothing. And the idea that we need the middle, well, we need people to be there. But when you have left-wing activists who want to end people, and, you know, there is some cancel culture on the right, too. When you want to silence the people who disagree with you, nothing works. So what would be better is if Jeep was brave. Jeep would have run a commercial that says we have to stop canceling each other. People may offend you, but that doesn't give you the right to silence them. But you won't hear that from corporate America anymore, will you? You won't hear brave commercials. Those of you whose politics they don't like, they can preach at you. They can ridicule you. You can be the butt of jokes, and how dare you respond? How dare you take your advertising dollars elsewhere? And we saw this. The Jeep commercial was we all need each other. We need to be reasonable. We need to talk together. We need Christianity in America that fosters conversation and unity. I was actually kind of surprised that it went there with the church. And it's a perfectly fine message. I am not outraged by the commercial, as some people are. I think that Springsteen is not the right messenger for it. But also, a lot of the people who loved the commercial are also the people who love to cancel other people. And I don't know that they see the irony there, that they're part of cancel culture and want to cancel those views with which they disagree. And yet we need the middle. Well, you know, we need the middle, but we need the left and the right as well. We need an intellectually honest left and an intellectually honest right that challenge each other so that each side is forced to refine its ideas. You know, there was this ridiculous piece in the New Republic last week on how essentially Catholic nationalism has taken over the conservative movement. If you read the piece, it was really a stupid piece with arguments being made, the premises of which and the presupposition of which it didn't even understand. It was excoriated and ridiculed by people on the left and the right. But the New Republic is notable because the New Republic used to be an intellectual rival to the National Review on the right. And its arguments were often in response to National Review, who would write in response. And together they would refine each other's arguments where you could disagree, but you could at least see the validity of the other side's point, even if you disagreed with them for public policy reasons or whatnot. Nowadays, you don't have that. You don't have that intellectual honesty. In a lot of publications on the left, they just want to silence people on the right. Anyone who disagrees with them is bad. It's not that they have reasonable ideas about which you disagree. It's they're bad. And so, yes, we need all sides, but it is very clear in the dominant culture of the day, you know who's in charge by who you can't criticize. And progressive woke culture wants to cancel anyone who dares disagree with them. And so many people now live in fear of being canceled They can't speak up. It's left to guys like me who kind of build an independent radio show where I manage my relations independently, and it makes me harder to cancel where I can speak up and say things like, for example, biology is not on the side of woke culture right now with transgenderism. That could get you canceled in traditional radio. But it's a valid opinion backed by biology. And when you're not allowed to say those things, of course, it fosters as much resentment as anything else. And it's a little disingenuous for corporate America to want to say we need the middle and reasonableness when corporate America would boycott someone who has those views.
Well connected and well respected. It's Erick.
I got another recipe coming to you on Wednesday. I got to write down my smoked wing recipe. People keep asking me for it, and I keep forgetting to write about it. I'm going to have to add Phillips to Phillips' to-do list to remind me to put my recipes up. Now, we need to move on. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Oh, I haven't even gotten to the speech, to the snowplow story. We'll get to the snowplow next hour. Goes perfect to what I was talking about. But Andrew Clyde has gotten himself into trouble. The new congressman from Northeast Georgia replaced Doug Collins. He got fined for not going through the metal detectors to get on the floor of the House. You know, Andrew Clyde, the congressman, Nancy Pelosi imposed rules. Andrew Clyde owns Clyde's Armory, the gun store, and Andrew Clyde is in trouble. But Nancy Pelosi herself bypassed the metal detectors. And the Republicans are now clamoring for Nancy Pelosi to take her own medicine. And they want Nancy Pelosi to pay the fine, $5,000 fine or whatever it is for bypassing the metal detector. And, you know, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. If you set a rule, this is one of the things that frustrates so many people these days. Our intellectual elite, our betters, our social betters, as they would probably view themselves, they demand that you and I do things that they themselves do not have to do. Nancy Pelosi demands that members of the House of Representatives go through a metal detector or they will be fined. And then she herself, because she's the Speaker of the House, decides she doesn't have to. Either the rules apply to every member of the House of Representatives or they don't apply at all. And they need to enforce equitably. Now, the Constitution says that each house gets to write its own rules. And as a result of each house writing its own rules, they can impose this metal detector rule. But if they don't enforce the rules equally, then a member of Congress can go to court and say, hey, we agree, we get to write our own rules, but they're only enforcing it against us, not themselves. And the courts can get involved. And it'll be very funny to see a Trump-appointed judge force Nancy Pelosi to pay her fine, which she should. All right, the phone number, 404-872-0750, 1-800-WSB Talk. Greg and Marietta, going to go to you first. Welcome.
Good morning, Eric. You know, my wife and I were watching the Super Bowl last night, and we noticed what was ostensibly a pro-life commercial.
What?
From Toyota.
I missed this one.
This was the one where the lady gets the phone call. She's adopting a child that has to have the legs amputated due to a medical condition, who goes on to become like an Olympic swimmer.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm Googling this. Yeah, Jessica
Toyota.
Long.
Yes, we watched the commercial and looked at each other immediately and said, you know, if that had been pitched as a pro-life commercial, it would not have been allowed to air.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And yet it was. Okay, I'm going to have to find this and play it when we come back.
Take a look at that.
I missed that one. So, yeah, I'm interested in this one. But, man, I got to tell you, I was really disappointed overall in the commercials last night. It seems like every year they've gotten worse. I don't know that there were a ton of them that I really remember. And I didn't see a ton of them. I was also playing foosball with my kid during the game. But, I mean, some of them just seem so preachy. So, you give me hope.
Somber is not the right word, but there was definitely a wet blanket over the Super Bowl last night.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Greg, listen, thanks very much for the phone call. Yes, that's what it was. It was kind of, people wanted escape, and there was no escape. And at what point do we recognize that at some point people want to escape? People don't want to have to deal with the virus right now. They want to be able to not have to think about this stuff. And you turn on the NFL game and you're getting lectured on systemic racism and wokeness and the virus, and we're all going to die. And this is terrible, and the country's going to hell in a handbasket. At some point, people just want to watch a football game.
30.
And they'll even watch a football game where Tom Brady runs away with it, and they'll stay till the bitter end just because they want the distraction. But with all the social justice, warrior wokeness nonsense, and predictably the left today is like, oh, all the right's complaining about the commercials. We clearly we got them right. No, you didn't, because even you don't like them. You just want to be miserable. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number, if you'd like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Last hour, we had a caller called Greg, I was lamenting the humorless commercials and some of the dumb ones. I've got more to say on the commercials, but he mentioned the Toyota commercial was a tearjerker, a good one. And that if they'd gone into it calling it pro-life, it probably couldn't have gotten it made, and yet it was a very pro-life commercial. I have found that commercial to play for all of us so that we can watch it together. I watched it during the commercial break. It features Paralympic swimmer Jessica Long. It tells her story. Has nothing to do with cars. It's just a feel-good ad. It shows her swimming.
Mrs. Long?
Yes?
We've found a baby girl for your adoption, but there's some things you need to know. She's in Siberia, and she was born with a rare condition. Her legs will need to be amputated. I know this is difficult to hear. Her life, it won't be easy. Mrs. Long?
It might not be easy, but it'll be amazing. I can't wait to meet her.
We believe there is hope and strength in all of us. Toyota, proud partner of Team USA.
The Olympic commercials are always the best commercials when you think about it. And this one in the Super Bowl, the Olympic commercials are always the most inspiring. So Jessica Long was adopted from a Russian orphanage by her parents. She had a rare condition called fibular hemimelia. Her legs had to be amputated, and now she is an Paralympic swimmer, a highly successful Paralympic swimmer. She can swim more successfully than most average swimmers who have their legs. And that was a good ad. Maybe people should get the hint on life and adoption. Very subtly. So here's the thing. I will deviate again from where I was headed. I want to get to Marjorie Taylor Greene. We've got a caller who wants to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I was going to jump off with, and I will in a moment. Just everybody be patient with me. One of the things that we're seeing on the right in particular these days is this orthodoxy that is shaping up of just own the left. If you make the people on the other side mad, you're successful. You don't actually do anything. You don't advance an agenda. You don't advance a public policy. You don't get any legislation done. You don't do anything other than you raise money by making the other side mad or making them the bad guy. You own the left. And one of the things you also do is there's an increasing on the new right, the illiberal right, the alt-right. It's increasingly less alternate and more part of the right, is this victimization mindset that I'm a victim, that the left is bad, the left is dominant culturally, and I'm a victim, and life is unfair, the playing field is unfair, and my preferred public policy is to punish the other side or make life fair for me by using the government in ways I would never want them to use the government, but I want to use the government in this way because I'm the victim here. I'm the victim. When you're really not. Life was never meant to be fair. There's nothing about fairness in the Constitution, and frankly, not a whole lot in the Bible. Life is not fair. And people who just want to be victims, they just want to be miserable. And we've seen this on the left, and now a lot of people on the right who say, hey, we're going to win like they won. We're going to behave like them, and maybe we will then win. They go with the whole, I'm a victim. I'm going to scream about everything. I'm going to take the humor out of everything. I want to cancel the other side. I want to cancel people on my side I disagree with. And on it goes. And one of the things as part of this victimization is giving up. You're not just giving up on advancing sound public policy. You're not just giving up on making the place a better place. You conclude the only way to make it better is just own the other side, to beat them. But you're not really beating them. You're not advancing a policy agenda that persuades Americans you're right. You just scream and yell and complain. The voters punished the woke set at the ballot box in November. Down ballot, Democrats across the board who embraced Antifa and BLM and the like, they all lost. Wanting to defund the police wasn't a winner. It worked with the woke set, but there aren't enough of them. But in large part, one of the things that conservatives have forgotten, what they've given up on, is embedding themselves within cultural institutions. Nowadays, essentially, if you are a conservative, your mindset is, I need to be able to storm into a Hollywood studio or a set or an academic institution and get a job wearing my Make America Great Again hat, my T-shirt that has Donald Trump and Jesus Christ on it, and be braggadocious about everything I believe, where actually you embed by being very subtle about it. There are interwoven narratives within the fabric of America that actually play very well. And one of those is life and adoption. And that's a message that resonates cross-culturally. It's one more and more people on the left actually are suspicious of, but it plays very well in commercials. And you get yourself embedded as a cultural conservative within the fabric of society, and you stick to your values over time, and you're way more valuable as a conservative warrior behind the scenes in these institutions as a tenured professor or as an advertising executive or as the person who oversees the spending of money for a corporation than you are as a conservative street fighter who is holding press conferences to trigger the left and thinks that you're winning by triggering the other side. There is more capital to the conservative who comes up with the very subtle pro-life adoption message in corporate advertising America than there is to the congressman who just wants to stand at a podium and say things that make the other. And people on the right have forgotten that lesson. And I hope younger conservatives will remember the lesson that go under the radar inside institutions and build up a reserve of conservatism there. And if you don't believe me, look at Robbie George. Where is he? Princeton, the conservative Robert George, the professor, the tenured professor who has great friends with a lot of progressive academics, but he is an inarguably ardent intellectual warrior for the right and does so from academia and does so as a tenured professor they can't get rid of, and makes where he is a safe haven for those who dissent from current cultural orthodoxy on the left. And he has street cred, and we need more like him and less like some of the brain biblical donkeys we keep electing to Congress to own the left without actually getting anything done. Now, having said that, that's probably the perfect transition to Tom calling from Gainesville. Tom, welcome.
Hey, yeah, that was great. And it was also great pointing out the disparity between Andrew Clyde's, the reaction to Andrew Clyde and the reaction to Pelosi. So we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'm not espousing any of the things that she said prior to her election, okay? Mm-hmm. But if we compare those people on the left, Schumer, Pelosi, AOC, the squad, the ad infinitum,
yeah,
and their voting record and how they will continue to vote versus how Marjorie Taylor Greene is very likely, and I'd put money on it, to vote on life, on religious freedom, freedom of speech, the IT issues with Zuckerberg and Twitter and all those things. Whose team? Who do you want voting on those issues? Right. Marjorie Taylor Greene or those other people I named?
Look, that's a great point.
On your team?
That's a great point. Somebody called me on my evening show on Friday about this issue, and where do I disagree with her? And I said the irony is probably on 9 out of 10 policy issues, she and I will agree. I would much rather her vote for me in Congress than a Raphael Warnock or a John Ossoff. I think that she and I will.
Can we give her a chance?
Yeah.
Can we give her a chance?
Well, so here's the problem, though, and this is where I take issue with that. I don't doubt that Marjorie Taylor Greene will vote regularly, reliably conservative with the House Freedom Caucus. The problem is that Marjorie Taylor Greene also can't keep her mouth shut, and the problem is when she comes out and says things to trigger the left, the policy issue that she's voting for is going to be undermined by her and her public statements when the media defines everybody else by the craziness that she says, as opposed to maybe something more reasonable that a Jim Jordan or someone else will say. And she ultimately undermines our side. It's one thing for me to come out and say that people who support abortion are killing children. They are killing kids. Let's make no. I mean, there's no quibbling on the point. When you support abortion, even though you say I'm personally against it, but I'll allow the other person to own the slave. I'm sorry, to kill the child. What you're saying is you are perfectly fine allowing someone to crack open the skull of a child, suck out its brain, rip off its head, and tear it limb from limb, extricating it from a woman's uterus, because it's her body, it's her choice. Very much like the slave owners would say, it's my property, it's my choice. You don't have to own a slave if you don't want one. It's amazing how the arguments of abortion really are the arguments of slavery. But, digress. Marjorie Taylor Greene comes out and is bombastic in a press conference voting for a pro-life measure. The media will seize upon that, and you and I have to also recognize there are a lot of people in America, much catered to that Bruce Springsteen ad, they all loved it, of the middle, where they are arguably pro-life. They want restrictions on abortion, maybe not as much as you and I would like, but when they hear someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene being the front person for the policy, and the way she talks about it is so in your face and obnoxious, it turns them off to the policy. And that's something that she's going to need to understand. Does she want to fundraise and own the left and trigger people, or does she actually want to accomplish something? And there is, unfortunately, a number of members of Congress, newly elected, who have decided that owning the left is more important than anything accomplished. And they have hired communications people to get them on TV instead of legislative people to help build a policy initiative to advance their goals. Some of them think it's impossible with the Democrats in charge. I would disagree. Look at my buddy Chip Roy in Texas, who beat Wendy Davis. He was able to draft a very small piece of legislation that extended and expanded PPP. It did nothing else, and he was able to get it passed with the Democrats and advanced arguably a conservative goal of saving small businesses during a global pandemic. And he didn't do a dog and pony show of triggering the left or owning the left. He just got the work done. So, yeah, let's give Marjorie Taylor Greene a chance to be a member of Congress and vote and assume she's going to vote the right way. But let's also not be surprised when Marjorie Taylor Greene, true to form, unless she changes, wants to use every issue to own the left and fundraise, and therefore the media allows her to be the face of public policy on the right. She defines it in a way that turns off votes we need to advance the agenda, and she gets money and gets to trigger the left and gets the rallying cry from the base while also undermining the very goals she claims to want. That's my concern with her, and I hope she proves me wrong on this. Thus far, given her statements, I'm not sure she will, but that is kind of the irony here is that all of us on the right will more than likely appreciate every way she votes. It's just, will she vote in such a way or say things along the way that undermine the very policies she's claiming to advance? And if she does, it's going to be bad for all of us. It's going to set us back. Now, we do have an opportunity to win here, and I just, again, would point people to the election where all of the Democrats who threw in with Antifa, BLM, and defund the police, they all lost to Republicans. Some of them to Republicans that you probably wouldn't like because you'd consider them too moderate, solely because they want to talk in a way that doesn't alienate other people. I think at this point, if you're talking in a way that is solely designed to alienate other people so they can't see the legitimacy of your values or your ideas, you're going to set yourself back. You're not actually going to advance. And personally, I look at the November election and see there's a lot of work for the GOP and conservatives to do, but also we're making a lot of ground with middle America turned off by the woke social justice warriors. And the one thing that would be a mistake for us to do is to out crazy the other side.
You can follow Erick around social media at
It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let us go to the phones. Bob, you're going to be next. Welcome, Bob. How are you?
Real good, Eric. How are you this morning?
Good. What's going on?
Like I told the Coast thing, I just heard that last call, and it kind of goes back to some of your comments made last Friday that the left would seize upon what Marjorie Taylor Greene would say. And that's typically the way Democrats would do that. Is that, well, let's just talk about her outlandish statements. We're not going to talk about the issue at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just typical of a dishonest nature, and that's typically what they do. So, so we read about Marjorie Taylor Greene and not some guy. But as we've seen in the stability that we've not encountered for the last 4 years in American politics, the stability is not on the Republican. The lack of stability is not on the Republican side. It's on the Democrat side. But yet the Republicans are the ones who are uncivil. So now we got ourselves a ball game that if you're not doing what Marjorie Taylor Greene does every once in a while, you're pretty much on the sideline. So,
well, see, I disagree with you in this, that you're not really on the sidelines. Take again, and take a Dan Crenshaw or a Chip Roy, who they're able to get out there and make very good points against the left's policies without making it personal. And the media would prefer to focus on Marjorie Taylor Greene and give her a disproportionate share of coverage because they don't want us to hear the reasonable voices on the right. And you can't stop her from getting that coverage. So I see what you're saying. And there is for a perceived price to be paid for actually being a nice person in politics right now. And a lot of people on the right just want to slag it out with the left as much as the left is with us, give them as much hell as they're giving us. And I get the temptation there. But I think when we do that, it really does overshadow the points that the right makes right now, where when we look at the election outcome in November, regardless of what you think about the presidential race, systematically down ballot, Democrats got wiped out everywhere where they embraced defund the police and woke politics and outrage politics, screaming about systemic racism and the like. And it was oftentimes, more than not, it was guys like Dan Crenshaw who were on television pointing that out, or a John Kennedy from Louisiana, who every time he goes on TV is hilarious. And the temptation for the media now is going to be to give people like Marjorie Taylor Greene a disproportionate amount of airtime so that those voices can't get on air. And I'm not necessarily going to persuade you on this one, but I hope you understand my point here and my concern about it.
Yeah, I understand. I agree. There's no heartbreak there, but I was just thinking back to the conservative caucus, how they were vilified, and I was thinking about how effective a guy named S. Atkins was for Ronald Reagan. That, there needs to be a point person out there that, we all can either fall behind or kind of agree or, be the lightning rod, and the rest of us can work on the issue.
Well, it's kind of funny you should say that. I don't know if you've heard this, but did you hear Mike Pence is going to be a institutional fellow at the Heritage Foundation and is headed back to Washington?
No, sir, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, so that news broke over the weekend, and I'm wondering if Pence may be the perfect person for this. You can't deny a former vice president airtime if he wants it. He's going to be one of the leaders of the Heritage Foundation, the premier conservative think tank in D.C., and letting Pence be the face of this stuff may actually be a really good thing, because the media can't, they'll try, but given that he did what he did on the 6th and had a bunch of people chanting, "Where's Mike Pence? Let's hang him," in the Capitol, being the front man for conservatism right now in Washington, that may be the perfect position for Pence. Let Pence be the front man for this stuff, and he overshadows everybody, including Marjorie Taylor Greene. And again, this is news that it kind of went under the radar, but follow along here. Mike Pence is going to be a leader, a fellow, they call it, at the Heritage Foundation in Washington. He's also going to be producing a podcast and working with Young America Foundation, a group that I dearly love. And I think this is actually a great thing. And letting Mike Pence be that guy, he is an articulate philosophical spokesman for conservatism. Allow him to be one of the faces and voices of this so that the media can't help but go to Donald Trump's former vice president as opposed to focusing on Marjorie Taylor Greene as a way to ignore a Dan Crenshaw, a Chip Roy, a Nikki Haley, a Doug Ducey, a Ron DeSantis, you name it. Don't let the media will use the craziest Republican possible to make us all look bad. Don't give them that opportunity. We can't play by the Democrats' rules. We got to play by different rules and frankly use the media's obsessiveness with finding crazy against them so that their own voices on the left look crazier than ours. welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you'd like to be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. State Representative Philip Singleton is going to join me at 11:30. He's introduced a significant piece of legislation. It's made it to committee for review that would make it very clear in Georgia that if you're going to be on a girls' high school athletic team, you've got to actually be a girl and not a boy who has decided you are a girl. A piece of legislation I adamantly support, and a piece of legislation that, of course, the left will demonize and demagogue because they have totally decided that they are no longer in support of biology. Now, I want to talk very briefly about something that's happening here in Georgia. Jason Shepard, who is the Cobb County Republican Party chairman. I've known Jason Shepard since I think I was a sophomore in college at Mercer. He was at UGA. He was in the College Republicans there. Maybe it was law school. In any event, I've known Jason Shepard for a very long time, and he has decided to challenge David Schaefer, in large part because of the state party screw-ups in November. And I've been very hard on David Schaefer of late. He went full bore into the election was stolen stuff. And the absurdity of some of the claims made overshadowed some of the legitimate claims he made. But the result was that he essentially entered into the stolen election echo chamber, and through his rhetoric and the rhetoric of others amplifying each other, they cost Georgia 2 Senate seats. It is under David Schaefer's tenure that for the first time since the 90s, the Republicans lost the presidency, and since the early 2000s, lost Senate seats under his tenure. And ironically, he was the executive director of the party at the time it was making major gains. In fairness to Schaefer, he inherited a party that had turned into an apparatus to get governors reelected and not to actually get Republicans elected. And it was underfunded and in debt and dealing with lawsuits. But I have to say, I've had more than one person tell me that in the immediate aftermath of the election, that the state party essentially was cajoled into joining the talking point that the election was stolen. And instead of having the back of the governor and the Republican Secretary of State, the state party decided to attack them, or specifically Raffensperger, and sow distrust in the process to the extent that the Republicans lost the election. And I think ultimately the state party has to be held accountable. This is one of my frustration with modern politics on the right. Because to a large degree on the left, they still do this. But on the right now, when there are failures, what happens is with those failures comes blame shifting. People do not say, I was culpable, therefore I resign. They don't do that anymore. They pass blame to someone else. So this is part of culture in general. And yes, there are some people who themselves on the left do this, but by and large, this is increasingly a phenomenon on the right these days where it's less partisan. People are to blame. Traitors in our midst are to blame. The media is to blame. The left is to blame. Everybody's to blame except themselves. And it is very clear to me that at an organizational level, the Republican Party in Georgia failed. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by just over 11,000 votes. And then John Ossoff beat David Perdue by about 52,000 votes, and more than 400,000 Republicans stayed home. And they stayed home after hearing the chairman of this party here in Georgia blast Brad Raffensperger and the integrity of the process and say how they were shut out of processes and on it goes. Much of it misdirected from the truth. Much of it stated in ways to minimize any culpability of the party towards losses. It sowed doubt in the process and the integrity of the process, and it undermined the GOP. They weren't helped by a president who also said it, and members of Congress also saying it. But instead of standing up for statewide elected Republicans, they were willing to throw them under the bus to protect their own scalps. And there should be accountability. And that accountability should come from resignations, which clearly aren't coming. If anything, I suspect that those in the party, probably the chairman of the party himself, will try to use the standing with the president to get back into elected office at the statewide level. Wouldn't be surprised if you saw some of them try to run for governor or run in primaries or the like. And I think that would be opportunistic, which I increasingly expect from the political apparatus as opposed to principle. But there's got to be some accountability and some reckoning. So kudos to Jason Shepard, the chairman of the Cobb County Republican Party, for standing up and being the one to say what the party did was unacceptable. The level of organization at the party, the level of planning on the ground, the level of implementation of plans to get out the vote, the willingness or lack thereof to run an aggressive absentee ballot campaign, a lot of this comes down to the state party. And just because the president of the United States was out saying absentee balloting, don't do it, do election day stuff, was not a reason for the state party to drop the ball on this sort of stuff. I mean, the campaign basics are what the state party in Georgia dropped the ball on. And there should be accountability. And the buck should stop at the top, and that is the chairman. And so I'm glad that there are people like Jason Shepard and probably others coming forward to point out that under David Schaefer, the Republican Party in Georgia had its worst showing in a generation, and there should be accountability. There should be. We've got to get back in the game of organizing at the grassroots level. We've got to get back in the game of strategizing an absentee ballot program, an early vote program. We got to get back in the game on this stuff. And outmaneuvered, outgunned, outmanned, outflanked, out fundraised, what have you. If people aren't willing to give the party money, this is a Republican state still, and you have major corporations in this state that depend on keeping Stacey Abrams out of power. And if they're not stepping up to help the Republican Party, there have to be some institutional problems that have not been corrected, and we got to figure that out. The state GOP's got to figure that out. There are problems that have to be dealt with. I mean, this is one of the most remarkable things about the party in Georgia and political power in Georgia is there are a lot of corporations in Georgia that in their public face have gotten fairly woke, but behind the scenes are scared to death that Stacey Abrams and the Democrats could come to power. They are scared to death that Stacey Abrams could be setting policy in the state for business. And I have heard rumors that there are outside groups setting up. I know there's a grassroots Stop Stacey Abrams group that is being set up by allies of the governor. But it looks like there are going to be other outside entities that are set up, and the state party could be involved with this. And the fact that so many people are setting up outside groups instead of coordinating through the party, where the party under campaign finance laws has a little more flexibility than these outside groups. And the fact that these outside groups are being set up and bypassing the party, despite the party's potential fundraising advantages, suggests that there is a lack of confidence in the party. And our elected officials who are Republicans and the rest of the state party probably needs to pay attention to that fact, that why are all of these groups wanting to be set up that will work at cross purposes, potentially have coordination issues in addition to fundraising issues, and yet they would rather do that than go through the party. That's a pretty damning indictment on the state of play in Georgia. And those of you who are concerned about the future of Republicans in Georgia probably need to note that that is happening and try to figure out why. Now, I'm going to go on and take a commercial break. Because there's a story I want to get to. It's not really related to a lot of what I have talked about, and I want to get there. And to get there, I need to take a timeout and reset. This is professionalism at play here. I'm resetting the clock so when we come back, we can talk about something else. If you're in Northwest Georgia, particularly if you're listening on WRGA in Rome, you're going to want to pay attention because this impacts you directly.
There's not my truth or your truth.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you'd like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. If you're listening up in Rome, in anywhere near Floyd County, you need to pay attention to this one because this has direct impact on you. Hundreds of vaccine doses that should have gone to vulnerable people on COVID-19 priority lists instead went to family members of employees at Floyd Medical Center in Northwest Georgia. And hospital advocates say a public health worker okayed the move. The State Department of Public Health is reviewing the situation and also looking into whether another Floyd County hospital may have done the same. Elbert County leaders, meanwhile, are questioning why a hospital was able to choose its vaccine recipients while a popular Elberton doctor had his vaccine supply seized for inoculating teachers. The state is not yet halfway through vaccinating the first priority groups: frontline health workers, first responders, long-term care staff, and residents, people at least 65 years old, and caregivers to the elderly. It will need 4 million vaccine doses to complete those groups, and it has administered just over 1 million. Anyone else is not yet eligible. Floyd Medical Center acknowledged in comments to a TV station that it had opened vaccination to employees' family members, whether or not they were eligible under the state's list of priority groups. The hospital CEO, Kurt Stuenkel, I have no idea. You'll have to forgive me, Kurt, told station WAGA that he thought it was permissible if the hospital had excess vaccine. Stunkel told them his wife was among 766 family members who were vaccinated. Bill Fortenberry, manager of corporate communications for Floyd Medical Center, declined to answer questions on the issue. Stunkel did not respond to text messages. A vice president with the Georgia Hospital Association, Ethan James, defended Floyd Medical Center. James said the health director of the public health district that includes Floyd County, independently from the state, advised the hospital that such a practice was allowable and appropriate. A spokesman for the State Department of Public Health did not confirm or deny that. She said, however, that DPH had learned about the allegations on Wednesday. Naturally, the AJC then jumps to people who were denied the vaccine or couldn't get it because hospital workers got it, and now suddenly we're into class warfare mode and the like. I got to tell you, I see both sides of this. I understand people who were desperate to get it, and they can't get it because the hospital gave it to family members. But I'm okay with what the hospital did. You have first responders who have, for a year, put their lives on the line for other people. If we're really honest about it, many of whom didn't do what they needed to do to keep themselves safe and got the virus. And these frontline hospital workers risked infecting their loved ones by putting their lives on the line. I cannot condemn or be mad at the hospital for letting its workers get their families safe. These people have been on the front lines for a year. They have seen death after death after death. It has weighed on them. It has burdened them. And more than one of them has had to live in isolation from his family so that he did not get his wife and kids sick. So many nurses have done the same, trying to protect loved ones, trying to make sure that they didn't spread it. In Floyd County, there were 8,829 total cases out of a population of 99,916. In the last 2 weeks, there have been 507 cases. In Floyd County, there have been death after death. Let's see. I'm looking on the state website, and I'm just talking about Floyd. I'm not even talking about the surrounding counties. 8,829 cases, 142 deaths, 28 probable deaths, 142 confirmed, 705 hospitalizations. At one point, you will recall, they had to convert a parking deck into an overflow facility. Thankfully, to my knowledge, they didn't have to use it, but they were prepared. That's what they were dealing with. I'm sorry that you can't get the vaccine. I'm sorry that your loved ones can't get the vaccine. But if you're going to hate on the frontline workers who have put their lives on the line for a year without break, without reprieve, without respite, so that they can sleep well at night knowing that their families are going to get the virus, show some compassion yourself and stop being selfish. I'm sorry to the people venting to the AJC that how dare the hospital system do this. I'm sorry to the people venting to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and TV stations that they have elderly loved ones who couldn't get the vaccine because hospital workers' families got it first. I'm sorry to all of you. But these people, I mean, I know some of the doctors and nurses here in Middle Georgia who thought it was no big deal at first, who really thought that everybody was overplaying their hand, they were overstating the case, and then it began to recede after the lockdowns, and they were, see, I told you so, it really wasn't a big deal, and then the summer hit. And more than one of them had to live in isolation from their family, saw people they knew die of the virus, and realized it was the big deal. And then worried about their families because of what they were seeing in the hospital. Some of them dealing with people who were in their friend group. And they've seen this for a year, and none of you have. You've been at home, and your loved one hasn't gotten the virus because you've been responsible. And you're desperate to get back out of the house. And you're upset because the doctors and nurses were given permission by the hospital to allow their loved ones to get vaccinated first. But there's a major difference here. They're not allowed to stay home. They're not allowed to be isolated. You want to get out of the house? They would love to not leave the house. You want your loved one safe? They're possibly bringing the virus home with them at night. So I'm sorry that you're upset you can't get the virus because hospital employees got it to their families first. I'm sorry. But I think that should have been the policy all along. I think every hospital in America should be making sure that the loved ones of the first responders are being protected, because those people are putting their lives on the line without choice unless they want to give up their career. And then they possibly are carrying it home at night, and they're living in separate rooms. They're isolating themselves from their loved ones, from their kids, from their toddlers in some cases, from their newborns. I don't have a problem with them doing this. I do not have a problem with them. Floyd Medical Center is not the bad guy here. Floyd Medical Center is not being mean here. And frankly, I think if a local medical center in a local county decides this is what it needs to do, let it. Let the counties decide how they want to administer the vaccine. Or give it to everyone. Open it up to everyone. And I'm sorry if you've got to wait. I'm sorry if you do. I know there are a lot of people desperate to get it. Ironically, there are a lot of people who don't want to get it, particularly in the medical community. The fact that so many at Floyd Medical Center wanted to get it speaks well of them, frankly, because we're dealing with about 70% of the population here within the healthcare community haven't wanted the virus. Actually, I guess the revised numbers now after more than a month of this it's down to about a third don't want it. But at first, it was about 70%. Almost 3/4 didn't want it. So stop making these medical centers the bad guys. Stop making Floyd Medical Center the bad guy. The local Department of Public Health told them it was okay. As best we can tell, it does appear that's the case. And I'm sorry that you didn't get it, but I think that this medical center did nothing wrong, and you should be thankful that they're putting their employees first at a time so often companies don't, and they did, to give their employees who have no choice but deal with the virus the peace of mind that they're not going to get their family sick. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. And yes, you actually can call in today. We have found our call screener in the woods of Florida with a pile of dead hogs and lots of bacon to produce. Okay. It is impeachment day. Well, tomorrow is impeachment. I can't decide if I'm even going to bother to cover impeachment. It was rather funny that the Democrats decided the last impeachment was not a real impeachment because there were no witnesses called to testify. And now the Democrats don't want to call any witnesses. There's a level of humor in all of this that the Democrats last time, in the last impeachment, somebody the other day, was it Bill Maher, said that Trump's impeachment is kind of like Groundhog Day. Last time the Democrats said that they wanted to call witnesses, and without witnesses, it would not be a legitimate trial. And now they need no witnesses, apparently. So is it a legitimate trial? And of course, the left spin on this is, all of them were there. They don't need any more witnesses. No. The Democrats actually claimed last time that in order to have a legitimate impeachment trial, there had to be witnesses who testified. And they said the Republicans were undermining it because there were no witnesses to testify. And now they want no witnesses to testify. That suggests to me that the Democrats don't really want to go through with it. Actually, what's going on here, if we're honest about it, is they know they don't have the votes. And so I'm sure we will have to respond and cover it. But let's also recognize the Democrats don't have the votes, and because they don't have the votes, they're not going to convict. The president now has his legal team, and essentially what the Democrats are trying to do here is to define the GOP by Trump. We are seeing a concerted strategy by the Democrats and their friends in the media to define the Republicans by the worst actors on the Republican side. It's something they don't do with the left. It is something that the media refuses to recognize, further undermines their credibility with the overwhelming majority of the public. On the left, it is increasingly mainstream to embrace the derangement over Israel, the anti-Semitism over Israel, the hatred of Israel. And it is increasingly mainstream on the left to embrace the talking point of defunding the police. But the American media goes out of its way to make sure everyone knows, actually, it's a fringe. It's a fringe. I'm sorry, but it's a fringe. It's not really, even though it's more than half of them, it's still a fringe. The media wants to make Marjorie Taylor Greene the face and voice of the GOP. It's not just the Democrats, it's the media. And you can say, well, the media and the Democrats are the same, but I think you do have to distinguish in these purposes for showing intellectual honesty and showing how the media actually is now part of the Democratic Party. They would never allow Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, or Ilhan Omar to be the face or voice of the Democratic Party, even though they have a mass audience, even though Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a following, a cult-like following of her own on the left. The media, at the behest of Democratic leaders, goes overboard in trying not to define the Democrats by her, but then go out of their way to define the Republicans by Marjorie Taylor Greene and any other outlandish Republicans they can find. I mean, remember that we've had these documented instances in the past several years where if you had a Republican city councilman in a city no one had ever heard of who said something ridiculous that made local news, it got blown up into a national story, and you had reporters on Capitol Hill rush to Republicans with microphones to demand that they denounce Podunk city councilman from Podunkville, USA. And they're like, I don't even know who this guy is. So you're saying you don't condemn him? It's like, well, if he said what you're saying he said, then yeah, it was bad. But they don't do that to Democrats. There are double standards that are obvious, and the media doesn't recognize, appreciate, own, or condemn those double standards. They embrace it. They use it. Increasingly, you see, for example, CNN, an organization I used to work for, where it was always left of center, but never aggressively of the left, so to speak. Now, for those of you that ruffles your feathers, let me explain. When I was at CNN, I was there for 3 years, and absolutely the majority of the people I worked with were Democrats, and behind the scenes were rather explicit about it, but tried. I mean, they had a guy like me there, Rush Limbaugh, actually pushed me to go to CNN, so at least they would have one voice of the right who understands the right, who is willing to talk of the right, who doesn't necessarily always align with Republicans, but is objectively conservative. So I could at least explain it. They don't even want to do that anymore. They don't want to have a lot of voices who would defend the president or explain what he's trying to do. The voices are increasingly hostile. The anchors, to some degree, are so enraged by what they've seen. Some of them think it is in the public interest that they condemn Republicans and Republicanism and conservatives constantly. They are MSNBC light. Jeff Zucker, by the way, is announcing he's going to be leaving at the end of the year. He's staying this year and then leaving. CNN spends more time obsessing about what Fox News says than anything else, and going after Fox News and trying to get Fox News canceled. Poor old Brian Stelter, if there was not Fox News, he would not have a job, because his entire job at CNN is apparently to serve as an apologist for the network and the attack dog on Fox News. And you see this across the left news media now, where if you are within the right news media, you are immediately condemned. And frankly, there are some on the right who play to this in the worst possible way, in that if they hear anything that doesn't affirm what they already believe, they change the channel from Fox. I had someone the other day send me an email that even Fox and Friends had gone to the left. Like, do you really believe that Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade and Ainsley Earhart are suddenly of the left? Do you really believe that? Maybe it's possible they just told you something that contradicts your priors, and that triggered you. I can assure you, I don't know Brian and Steve well, but I know them well enough that they have not gone to the left and would not go to the left. And the fact that you have people upset with them from the right actually says more about the people who are upset with them than it does them. I know their executive producer. 1,000% a conservative. And if you're mad at them, it's on you, not them. If you're mad at them, it's because you want to be affirmed and never challenged. But that's the same thing now with CNN, where CNN and MSNBC largely choose to affirm left-wing talking points. And many of them think that they're actually doing a service to the right and the GOP, cleaning them up, forcing them to be intellectually honest. But you can't be intellectually honest when you're not even willing to give validity to claims from the right. And that then gets us back to impeachment. We're not going to learn anything from this. The media will use it to define the GOP. It's why Chuck Schumer doesn't feel the need to have witnesses. They can play on the outrage of what happened on January 6th and tie it to the president. The media will help them do that. This actually has nothing to do with actually impeaching, convicting the president, barring him from high office. The Democrats have actually decided it is useful for the GOP to have to deal with Donald Trump in 4 years. The media has decided, and the Democrats have decided, that defining the Republican Party as the party of Trump is the best way to get rid of the party. I mean, there's never been an affinity for the Republican Party in much of the mainstream media. The New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, they are the Washington Post, the LA Times. Overwhelmingly, they do lean to the left. Some to varying degrees, but it's not in dispute. They're not. None of them are centrist. They all lean to the left. And it is useful for them now to use the president, Donald Trump, and people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and QAnon and the like to define the GOP in a way that they hope will eradicate it. Now, the GOP is not going away. Ballot access rules and funding and the like, you're not going to get rid of the GOP. But to the extent they think they can marginalize it, they will. This is all part of a strategy, a prepackaged strategy to define Republicans by the worst elements therein, to tie them and the president, Donald Trump, to the GOP as the leaders and the idea machines of the GOP. There is a concerted effort now to burn it all down on the right. What they don't understand is that they can't. They can't get rid of the GOP. Ballot access rules make a third party impossible, and they're okay. They're playing for monopoly at this point. They're playing for unitary power at this point. The Biden administration has come out and said they're going to, if the GOP votes against their COVID relief package, use it to punish the GOP and attack the GOP for being against things. But, you got Larry Summers out there saying, if you pass this package, we're headed into recession. Of course, Paul Krugman, who has been, used to be someone who was smart enough to win a Nobel Prize in economics, is so now partisan that he's out there pushing back against Larry Summers and others saying, no, you should do this. Run with it. I'm with Summers on this one. You're going to cause inflation and you're going to cause a recession, and it'll be the left that did it. If anything, they're upset with Larry Summers for speaking out publicly because now they can't blame the GOP. But the media will still try to blame the GOP. When we go into recession, they'll try to make it about the Republicans saying no to things Joe Biden wanted. And that's what impeachment is. It's all about defining the GOP. It has nothing at this point to do with correcting a wrong or convicting a president. It has everything to do with a public spectacle to define the Republican Party, to try to marginalize the Republican Party, because the Democrats have more correctly interpreted the November elections than the Republicans. The Republicans so internalized at the grassroots level that it was all stolen from them, they haven't paid attention to everything else. And the Democrats have. The Democrats understand that they were hurt by defund the police. They were hurt by their own side, much more so than the president defined the GOP. And that is the point you have to pay attention to here above anything else. The Democrats got defined by their worst element. And they perceived Donald Trump as the GOP's worst element, and the Republicans were not defined by Donald Trump. The Democrats are mad as hell that that's the case, because Republicans came within a few votes of taking back the House and nearly held the Senate, had the whole lying about the stolen election not undermined Republican confidence in the integrity of the process. And so now, because the Republicans could not be defined by Donald Trump on the ballot, the Democrats want to define the GOP by the president, QAnon, and Marjorie Taylor Greene now, but I don't think it's going to work for them. The voters were smart enough in November to realize that the Democrats are more captured by their base than the Republicans are captured by theirs. And frankly, having so many Republicans behind the scenes in the House vote to stand with and support Liz Cheney in her position actually reiterates to the voters that they understand much of what Republicans say in public is performance. Much of what Democrats say in public, they believe. And you can look at this cynically, but you need to understand your average voter out there is looking at the Democrats and realize they're more crazy than the GOP, and the Democrats are desperate to make people think that the Republicans are the crazy ones. It didn't work in the ballot box, and I don't think it's going to work now.
There's not my truth or your truth.
Some breaking news happening right now that's kind of sad. Representative Ron Wright has died. Now, he's not a Georgia congressman. He's a Texas congressman, but a very nice guy, 67 years old, died of COVID-19. He was announced January 21st. He was positive. He had been quarantining himself and his family, had not been going to Washington regularly, but came into contact with someone in his district who had the virus and got infected. And he and his wife have both been in the hospital. He also had cancer, which weakened his immune system, and he has passed away. He voted against impeachment. That was really his last vote on the floor of the House. Very, very sad. He was a very, very pro-life committed congressman. And also, there's not a lot of media dancing on his grave because he took the virus very seriously and was limiting his trips and travel and as much interaction as he could, but couldn't avoid everything and wound up getting the virus. So prayers for him and his family. His wife, Susan, is on the mend from the virus. He's got a daughter, Rachel, and his sons, Derek and Justin, and he's got 9 grandkids. How old was he? 67. Congressman Ron Wright of the Arlington area in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex died today of COVID-19. Now, let us go to the phones. I want to go to Robbie calling. You're going to be next. Welcome.
Hey, I appreciate you taking my call, Eric.
Sure.
Appreciate your show.
Thanks.
Yeah, listen, man, just want to get your, of course, looking online, just trying to see policies that are being written up and just concerned about guns and ammo. I see where a possibility of a 50% tax on ammo in the future. Just kind of want to get your take on what you see developing from all of this.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the Democrats wanted to, so let me explain the reconciliation process real quick. So reconciliation is where once a year the Senate can vote on a measure to improve the national debt, and it can't be filibustered. And the Democrats had wanted to stick in the ammo tax and a tax on long barrel guns and magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. And they aren't going to be able to do it because it deviates too much from COVID relief. So the Senate parliamentarian has suggested that it deviates too much. They can't do it this year. They may be able to do it next year, but I don't know that Joe Manchin would go along with a 50% tax in doing something like that. So hopefully it's dead for now, but they're going to try on the regulatory measures. They're going to try to do more gun regulation. If you'll remember, Donald Trump unilaterally banned the bump stock through the ATF with regulation, and they're going to try some of that. Since no one opposed the president doing that, they think they've got a case to be made based on the president's precedent of banning the bump stock, that they can ban high-capacity magazines and things like that. I don't think they're going to be able to. I think a judge will stop them. But I'm worried, and my goodness, trying to buy ammo right now or guns is nuts. We lost our beloved advertiser, True Precision, not because we did something that made them mad, but because they don't have anything to sell right now. I love True Precision, but they don't have anything right now. We told them come back whenever they want. I love them and they're friends, but they don't want to be advertising on the show and then not have anything to sell you guys. Speaking of, I should tell you this hour of the program is brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan in Noonan. I actually had somebody reach out the other day about them. And yes, please, if you are a business, not an individual, but a business, and you've got you need a loan for your business, and it is 6 figures and up. We're not talking small loans, 6 figures and up. Go to First Liberty. They can probably help your business. There are a lot of banks right now, just because of the economic climate of the virus, are saying nope, saying no to everybody. First Liberty wants to say yes. They want to work with you. Go to firstlibertyga.com, firstlibertyga.com. You can just spend 5 minutes with them. Go to firstlibertyga.com, call them, see the number there on the website, call them. Spend 5 minutes with them, see if they're a good fit for you, and they'll see if they can structure an access to capital, a loan, something for you to help you if you got a business. When we come back, State Representative Philip Singleton is going to join me about his new measure, made it into committee today on transgender sports. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you'd like to be on the program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Joining me by phone is State Representative Philip Singleton with a new piece of legislation that is attracting buzz in Atlanta. Some good, some bad. Welcome. How are you?
Good, sir. How you doing?
Good. I'm amazed at how quickly the opponents of your legislation want to spring into action and not actually go after your legislation, but attack you for it, and wanted to be able to get you on to talk about what it is and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. It is always amazing. The attacks always from the tolerant side always get very personal and never about the legislation at hand. So that's definitely a challenge, I think, in modern politics that we got to fight through. But anyway, Eric, what my bill does, I mean, it simply just does two things. One, it says that to compete in girls' sports, you have to be biologically female, something that has been common practice for as long as anyone alive can remember, and something that's pretty well established in science. And the second part of the bill just says that if you have a daughter or a niece or someone that is injured or suffers, doesn't get a scholarship or something like that for female sports because it's been given to a biological male, that they have a civil cause of action to seek injunctive relief or to seek damages for that. So it's really the bill is laser focused on protecting girls' sports.
Well, and what's so interesting to me in the conversation is that the woke crowd on the left now would say that there's all sorts of bigotry, and they have done a very good job of trying to seed the ground with studies that show biological male people who claim to be girls, they're not competitively advantaged, but yet there are actually a ton of studies out there that show the opposite. And it's not just the studies. We've got real world evidence in multiple places around the country of boys who've decided they're girls competing in sports, and it's almost impossible for the girls to compete at a level playing field with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not people like to say, well, it's a solution without a problem. People who don't know what they're talking about like to say that, but there's over 250 high school athletes in 1 year ran faster times than the lifetime best of Allison Felix, the champion sprinter. And the evidence is just overwhelming. Males participate performance is 10 to 20% higher to comparably fit female trained athletes, and there's stuff that doesn't. The science says that lung capacity and heart cavity size and bone density, and these are things that there's no surgical or hormonal procedure that take away these advantages. And so it's just interesting to see. And by the way, it's a fringe group on the left that opposes this. The overwhelming majority of even Democrats, something to the tune of 75-80% of the American people think this is a no-brainer to protect women's sports. And they view it like I do, which is that, athletics is about biology. We divide our athletes by age, weight, gender, under the old definition. Now, the left would say that's sex, right? Because sex is binary, gender by their definition is not. And so it's important that we understand the terms, but this is not a fringe idea.
No, it's not a fringe idea. And increasingly you're finding parents say, why are my daughters having to compete against biological males? There was this, I remember, I think it was the Williams sisters, Venus or Serena Williams at one point made a statement. This has been several years ago now, that they really wanted to play against a guy to prove just how good they were. And they wound up doing a match against a guy who bragged about having essentially gotten up that morning, mowed his grass, drank several beers, had a few cigarettes, and played. He wasn't even in the top 100 men tennis athletes, and he beat them. And ever since then, they've been fairly open that we're playing a different sport than men's tennis. It's a different sport at a different speed, and girls track and everything else.
It's interesting because you're right. I mean, 100% nailed them on the head, and there are tons of examples of that. The under 15 Texas boys team, beat our women's national team in soccer. I think 5-2, they crushed them the same year that they, won the championship and were world champions. And so it's just like, there are truths. And, the interesting thing that I'm sure you've seen some of the media buzz lately, but it's all dishonest the way they cage it, right? They want to take this, and the headlines are all the same. It doesn't matter what media organization gets it. They say, Singleton wants to take away the ability for transgender athletes to compete. That's not factual. What we want to do is make sure that every single athlete gets to compete on a level, fair playing field. So transgender athletes, their identity does not play into the equation. We want them to have access to compete, but they need to compete against people that are the same sex as them.
Now, what's the status of the legislation?
So we just got assigned to education the last legislative day. I just got a notice this morning. It's going to go to a subcommittee, education subcommittee, tomorrow at 1:30. So that's where a lot of the bugs and kinks of the legislation will get vetted out. It's not for a very complex subject. It's not a very complex bill. You're talking about essentially, 2 paragraphs. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about the legislation too, which is why some of the opposition is a little bit interesting, is that it just codifies into law what is current practice in the Georgia High School Athletic Association, for example. Mm-hmm. So we're not even, no student athlete today in Georgia, and that's an important distinction, right? Because there are 13 other states that are all allow transgender athletes to compete against people that are not of their biological sex, and that's why you're seeing these transgender champions start to pop up in Connecticut and Idaho and California. But in Georgia currently, by rule, it's protected. What we're trying to do is we're trying to codify that in law so that it will remain protected, even if there's, just as a hypothetical, some sort of federal government overreach.
Now, how is the Biden administration's executive order on education and sports going to impact the legislation?
Well, currently it's not. So, as you're aware, he's been doing executive orders left and right. But his executive order, it has no force of law on us now. We'll see what the Department of Education comes up with, because his instructions to departments are essentially very vague. And I even saw a comment from one of his appointees the other day kind of walking back that he was not talking about girls' sports in his very general executive order, because he knows this is a losing topic for the left. But there will be a ruling that comes from the Department of Education. We'll see what that is. It will probably be akin to the 2016 letter to colleagues that President Obama issued that said we'll take away federal funding if you don't treat everyone based off of identity, that sex doesn't matter anymore. Obviously, we know that was enjoined by a federal court. That's a far overreach of presidential authority. So that was unconstitutional. I believe that the same result will occur. Nothing's going to happen unless there's a the legislature addresses this issue. So I feel very confident that what we can do can really have a long-term impact in protecting girls' sports.
Now, what's the bill number?
It's House Bill 276.
276. And you mentioned it's coming it'll be in the Education Committee. Are they actually going to have hearings on it tomorrow?
Yes, sir. First hearing is going to be tomorrow at 1:30. It's going to be in the Education Subcommittee. We need anybody that's willing to come up to testify, especially these young women that have been working so hard and training so hard in their sports to come testify. It's important that everyone realizes that this bill is not intended to be against anyone. This bill is to protect the ability. My daughter's I have a 10-year-old daughter who's, she's the light of my life, and she deserves the chance to compete fairly and fight to be a champion. And it's not fair to ask her to do that against people that have a biological advantage.
Well, let me ask you this. If someone does want to testify, what do they need to do?
So they just need to come to the committee hearing and sign up. There is this subcommittee, I haven't seen the rules on it yet. So we do have, obviously, COVID-19 has created some issues. So I'm not, in other words, I don't know if there's going to be Zoom or not for this committee hearing.
Right.
I just honestly don't know. So my recommendation would be plan on coming up to the Capitol and coming to the CLOB, the Covered Air Legislative Office building, and just sit in the committee room and say you want to speak on it. we have open doors, and you should be able to speak on it if we have the space available.
Well,
I will tell you.
Go ahead.
Just Eric, I know you're going to move on, but the advocates for common sense and legislation to protect our women, we have a tendency of not being as loud and as engaged as the advocates that are trying to take away those rights and the fair competition. And so if anybody that's listening, thinks that it's important to protect our girls' sports, now's the time to be loud about it, because if we're not, then we're going to get shouted down by the opposition. And I for one am personally tired of that.
It's interesting to me that you make that point, because it does appear in a lot of public opinion polling that parents are very concerned about the issue, particularly in suburbs. When it comes to getting college scholarships and the like, moms and dads don't like the fact that their girls could be competing against boys. And yet the vocal opposition to legislation like yours is much more strident than the parents who they've got day jobs. They got to take care of their kids in school and can't necessarily mount effective advocacy for your legislation. So, I do hope people who support your legislation will show up and testify.
Yeah, it's not. I'm going to make another issue that'll I'll get your wheel spinning for a while. But the Georgia GOP, we already have our own identity crisis as a GOP, and we've seen the issues we've had these last election cycles. We have a tendency as a GOP to latch on to bipartisan bills that are really Democrat bills that a few Republicans support, and push those. It's about darn time that we latch on to a strong, no-brainer conservative piece of legislation, which, by the way, the majority of Democrats also support, and let the left explain to their base how they are just in blind opposition to good, common sense reform. It's the same argument I make for education constantly. The Georgia GOP, we have a window to do something that's good for our state and that's universally understood and appreciated, and set the narrative. And I just hope we take advantage of the opportunity.
I hope we do. Representative Singleton, thanks very much for stopping by. I appreciate it very much.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric. Have a good day.
You too. His legislation is HB 276. It'll be before the House Education Committee tomorrow. You can show up and have your voice heard on it. When we come back, we'll take your phone calls, and I haven't even gotten to the snowplow issue, but I'll take your phone calls first as soon as we get back.
There's not my truth or your truth. There is only
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let's go to Fayetteville, and JD, welcome.
Good morning, Eric.
Hi there.
Would you remind your listeners to vote tomorrow in the Griffin Judicial Circuit District Attorney election?
I had no idea there was an election tomorrow.
Yes, it's in Fayette, Pike, Upson, and Spalding counties. Marie Broder is running. She's the Republican, and her opponent has never been in a courtroom.
Wow.
He's a lawyer, but he has never argued a case in a courtroom, so we hear.
Oh, this is happening so much. It's disturbing the number of people who are running for these things, pushed on by the left oftentimes, and have no courtroom experience or practical experience or anything else. Okay. I will consider people reminded. I had no idea. Let me make a note. Hang on a second, because let me make a note here. So this is the Spalding Judicial Circuit?
Griffin Judicial Circuit. It's the four counties of Fayette, Spalding, Pike, and Upson.
Fayette, Spalding,
Pike. Are the counties that are voting on it tomorrow, and not many people know about it, but it's a very important one.
I am going to make a note for my evening show as well, because I know that penetrates, Fayette and Spalding for sure. And then this show gets into Pike and Upson and parts of Spalding. So I will definitely do that tonight as well. I'm glad you called in to talk about this. I had no idea there was a yet another election. It seems like we can't stop having elections.
Well, I didn't think I had heard you mention it, but I can't hear you 100% of the time.
Well, look, no, I hadn't, because I had no idea. So I'm glad you called, JD. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. I put this story, man. I wanted to talk about it. There's so much I wanted to talk about. Oh, wait, you know what? Maybe I'll save that for tomorrow, because you got to hear about Timothy Wilkes, because I didn't know about this. So Chris Steyerwalt was the beloved political editor of Fox News until he called Arizona so early in the night and stood by the call, and they fired him for doing so. As I guess you could say, as a penance to their viewers who were upset. Steyerwalt got canned at Fox. He's actually a very nice guy and wicked smart. And he's got a piece over at The Dispatch. And I can't sing the praises of The Dispatch enough. It is Steve Hayes' project over had been at the Weekly Standard. It is very conservative, but not pro-Trump. And the thing that I like about it is you can tell that there's a farm team for conservative reporters. And I think this is something a lot of people don't appreciate, and it's not talked about a lot on the right, because we don't want to blow their cover. But there are a number of good, and I mean actual good reporters embedded within news operations around the country who are from conservative outlets, like the Washington Examiner, the Weekly Standard, the National Review, and they've become good and well-known reporters. And Steve Hayes has been the mentor to a lot of these guys, and he is in and of himself a very good reporter, and a great editor, and a great mentor to conservatives who want to be in journalism. And he started the Dispatch on Substack. I've got my daily email on Substack, and they're like the number one Substack publication. They've got a multi-million-dollar subscription base, and they do really good work. And it's almost like a newspaper. You can subscribe to it. You can read it. They do editorial commentary, but they also do really good news and analysis. And they've got Steyerwalt writing a piece there. And one of the things he notes, he calls it the dangers of the derp state. If you go to thedispatch.com, you can see this. How we became a nation of so many dupes and fools is a matter at least as complicated as the cause of Donald Trump's presidency. And one of the things he notes is that people say oftentimes Donald Trump is a symptom, not a cause of something. I think that's a fair statement. And one of the things that he points out is a story I totally missed in the crazy news cycle of the day, and that is Timothy Wilkes, a 20-year-old. The story of Timothy Wilkes. And this is disturbing. Timothy Wilkes was shot and killed Friday night. Friday night. So, yes, Friday night, this past Friday. I guess this isn't an old story. This is a brand new story. This is from the Tennessean over the weekend. Timothy Wilkes was shot and killed Friday night in the parking lot of a Hermitage business after a robbery prank for a YouTube channel went wrong, according to the Nashville police. The homicide unit is investigating a claim of self-defense in the shooting. Timothy Wilkes, age 20, was killed in the parking lot of Urban Air Trampoline and Adventure Park around 9:20 p.m. When officers arrived at the scene around 5 minutes later, 23-year-old David Starnes admitted shooting Wilkes. Investigators were told Wilkes and a friend approached a group of people, including Starnes, with butcher knives while participating in a prank robbery for a YouTube video. Starnes was unaware of the prank. He shot Wilkes in defense of himself and others, according to the police. The investigation is ongoing. Timothy Wilkes had a YouTube channel and decided to make a prank video to be YouTube famous, where someone filmed him recording a robbery, a fake robbery, a pretend robbery, and the people who he was robbing had no idea they were part of a YouTube prank video. And one of those individuals had a concealed carry permit, pulled his gun, and killed Timothy Wilkes, shot and killed him for attempting to rob them with butcher knives. Don't show up with a knife to a gunfight. We live in an age where people have lost their damn minds. I'm befuddled by it all. I don't even know what to say at this point with so many people out there who they've gone nuts. They've gone nuts. And so many people want to be TikTok famous or YouTube famous, and they engage in stunts to get themselves some notoriety. Well, Timothy Wilkes, age 20, will go down in history as someone trying to get himself notoriety, and he got killed as a result of it because he decided to do something like this. So this is what Chris Steyerwalt writes in the Dispatch, who flagged this story. The evidence comes from across the country. It transcends divisions of politics, economics, education, ethnicity, and gender. You've got the nephew of a former president all the way down to a post-adolescent YouTube wannabe. What connects them is rank imbecility. For those who haven't heard, it was the nephew of a former president who led an anti-vaccine rally where they blocked people from getting the vaccine in Los Angeles the other day.